The billionaire returned home early and was shocked to find his maid teaching his son. The scene Robert Williams encountered when he quietly opened the door to the library of his Beverly Hills mansion left him completely paralyzed. There was Grace, the 35-year-old woman he had hired to clean his house just 2 months earlier, sitting on the floor next to his 8-year-old son, Tyler. But she wasn't cleaning. She was teaching math using colored blocks and a methodology Robert had never seen before. If you have 5 green blocks and you need to divide them equally among 3 friends, what happens? Grace asked with infinite patience as Tyler manipulated the objects with total concentration. "There's 1 block left," the boy exclaimed, beaming. "But I can give a little piece to each friend." Robert held his breath. His son, diagnosed with learning difficulties and costing a fortune in sessions with specialists, was genuinely excited about math for the first time in his life. Grace smiled in that way only true teachers know how to. Exactly. This is called division with a remainder. It shows that things don't always divide up perfectly, but there's always a creative solution. That was when Robert decided to interrupt. "What the hell is going on here?" Tyler's smile vanished instantly. Grace stood up calmly, showing no surprise or fear, a strange reaction for a maid caught neglecting her duties. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Tyler was having trouble with his homework and I just—" Grace paused, her eyes revealing something Robert couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't submission. It was almost pity. "You were hired to clean, not to teach. How dare you interfere with my son's education without permission?" Robert felt his voice rise. Tyler tried to defend Grace, but Robert sent him to his room immediately. Alone with the maid, he continued coldly, "I think you'd better remember your place in this house." Grace nodded silently, but there was something in her eyes, a disturbing serenity, as if she were keeping a secret too powerful to reveal. "Of course, Mr. Williams. I apologize for overstepping my bounds," she said softly, beginning to gather the colored blocks Tyler had left scattered. Yet Robert noticed something strange. Grace didn't seem nervous or remorseful. In fact, she handled those teaching materials with a professional familiarity that didn't make sense for a simple cleaning lady. As she put the blocks away, Robert saw something that intrigued him. She organized the materials into specific pedagogical sequences, an action that revealed deep technical knowledge of teaching methodologies. "Grace," he called, curiosity overcoming irritation. "Where did you learn these techniques?" She paused for a second before answering. "YouTube, Mr. Williams. The internet teaches a lot these days." But Robert knew enough people to recognize when someone was lying. Grace wasn't exactly lying. She was omitting something much bigger. That night, as Tyler went to bed earlier than usual, visibly disappointed by the abrupt end to his fun lesson, Robert couldn't stop thinking. In 2 months, Grace had transformed the atmosphere of his home in a way he couldn't explain. What bothered him wasn't just that he'd caught the maid teaching his son, it was how she had done it, with a naturalness and competence that suggested professional experience. And there was something else that disturbed him even more. Tyler had shown more progress in 30 minutes with Grace than in months of expensive therapy with Dr. Richardson, California's most renowned learning disability specialist. The next morning, Robert couldn't concentrate during his meetings. Over breakfast, Tyler had asked 3 times when Grace would be back to help him with numbers, and each question was like a stab in Robert's conscience. "Daddy, why can't Grace teach me anymore?" Tyler asked, idly stirring cereal that cost more than most people's weekly salary. "Because she has other duties, Tyler. Dr. Richardson is your tutor, remember?" Robert replied curtly. But inside, something bothered him deeply. Dr. Richardson cost $300 an hour, and Tyler always left those sessions more frustrated than when he entered. Grace had achieved in half an hour what the specialist hadn't managed in months. At 10 a.m. in the morning, Robert called his executive assistant, Jennifer. "I need all the information you can find on our housekeeper, Grace Thompson. Work history, references, everything." "Any specific problem, Mr. Williams?" Jennifer asked, already typing notes. "Just delayed due diligence," Robert lied. The truth was, his curiosity was turning into obsession. 2 hours later, Jennifer returned with a file that was far too thin for someone who was 35 years old. "Sir, it's strange. Grace Thompson has impeccable references from the last 2 families she worked for, but before 2019, it's as if she didn't exist professionally." Robert leafed through the documents. Everything was very clean. Too clean. What about her education? High school in Chicago, according to the documents, nothing else. But Robert knew something didn't add up. That afternoon, he decided to confront Grace directly. He came home early again, finding her cleaning the library, exactly where the incident had happened the day before. Tyler was still at school. "Grace, can I talk to you?" She turned calmly, unhurried, unbothered, that unsettling serenity again. "Of course, Mr. Williams. I've been thinking about yesterday. You demonstrated very specific pedagogical knowledge. Where did you actually learn those techniques?" She paused her cleaning, but her eyes never left his. "As I said, the internet has many educational resources these days. YouTube doesn't teach advanced Montessori methodology, Grace," he pressed. "You organize those blocks according to pedagogical principles that cost thousands of dollars to learn at universities." It was then that Robert saw something that baffled him. Grace smiled. Not a submissive or nervous smile, but one that carried knowledge, experience, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Have you researched Montessori methods, Mr. Williams?" she asked, quietly. And in that moment, Robert began to realize that Grace Thompson was not who she appeared to be. "Williams?" The question caught him off guard. Robert Williams, CEO of a technology company valued in the billions, was being questioned by his housekeeper about knowledge he had Googled in a hurry barely an hour earlier. "Well, it's my responsibility to know the educational methods applied to my son," he replied stiffly. "Of course," Grace nodded, returning to her cleaning. "It's an important responsibility." Her tone wasn't sarcastic, yet something in it made Robert feel small, as if she knew exactly what he had done, desperately researched just to try and catch her out. That night, Robert called his friend Marcus, the human resources director at an executive recruitment firm. "Marcus, I need a favor. Can you do a more thorough background check on a maid?" "Robert, man, that's a little paranoid. What trouble has she caused?" "None. It's just, she seems too qualified for the job." Marcus laughed. "You're complaining about having a competent maid? The world's really turned upside down." "It's not that," Robert said, hesitating. He realized how crazy it would sound if he explained what was really bothering him. "Just do me this favor." 3 days later, Marcus called back with information that left Robert even more confused. "Man, your maid is a ghost. Grace Thompson only officially existed since 2019. Before that, nothing. No credit cards, no address, no job. It's like she was born at 30. Is that even possible?" "Theoretically, yeah. Some people change names for witness protection, messy divorces, or..." "Well, Robert, why are you digging so hard into this woman?" Robert hung up without answering. He didn't have a logical explanation, or rather, he had one he didn't want to admit. Grace intrigued him in a way that challenged everything he believed about class, education, and control. The following evening, during dinner, Tyler asked a question that cut through the air like a knife. "Dad, why don't you like Grace?" "I like her, Tyler. I just think everyone should do their job. But she helps me understand things. Dr. Richardson talks to me like I'm stupid." Robert nearly choked on his wine. "Tyler, Dr. Richardson is one of the best specialists in the country. He's boring and makes me feel bad. Grace makes me feel smart." That night, Robert stayed up late, unable to shake the boy's words. For the first time in years, he questioned whether his certainties about competence, education, and value were as solid as he always believed. Grace Thompson was a maid who seemed to possess the knowledge of a graduate professor, a woman who hadn't officially existed before 2019, a woman who taught better than the experts he paid thousands to consult, and a woman who looked at him as if she could see through every expensive suit and polished title, straight into the man beneath.
What Robert didn't know yet was that every question he asked, every investigation he launched, was being carefully watched by someone who had long ago learned to recognize the signs of a powerful man trying to destroy what he couldn't control. And Grace Thompson, or whoever she really was already several steps ahead, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal that some secrets are too powerful to stay buried forever. Robert's obsession with unmasking Grace had turned dangerous. Over the next 2 weeks, he began to act like a man losing control. First, he installed additional cameras around the house for security. Then he started coming home at random times, always hoping to catch Grace in some suspicious act. What he found was even more frustrating: an impeccable maid who did her job with quiet, unshakable efficiency. "Jennifer, I want you to hire a private investigator, someone discreet but efficient." "Sir, wouldn't that be a little excessive for a maid?" Robert hung up without answering. Jennifer wouldn't understand. None of his privileged white employees would understand the feeling.
Mr. Williams, a housekeeper with no formal qualifications, should not even be involved in the educational process of a child with Tyler's specific needs. Exactly. I want official documentation that this interference is harmful. What Robert didn't know was that Grace had anticipated exactly this move. 2 days after Dr. Richardson's visit, during which she had interrogated Tyler about his alternative study methods as if they were dangerous experiments, Grace received a call. Dr. Grace Mitchell. The voice on the other end was familiar and warm. "Dr. Peterson, I wasn't expecting your call so soon." Dr. James Peterson was the director of the Harvard-MIT Educational Institute, one of the most prestigious research organizations in the country. And he had once been Grace's doctoral advisor before she became Grace Thompson. "Grace, I saw the reports on innovative methodologies coming out of Beverly Hills. Small educational world, isn't it? I recognized your work immediately." Grace smiled for the first time in weeks. "Is it time?" "More than time. The Institute has approved your official return. We have a position waiting for you, a substantial research budget, and some influential people who would very much like to meet the real Dr. Mitchell." That night, Grace did something she had avoided for 2 years. She opened the laptop she kept hidden in the back room and accessed her academic email for the first time since changing her identity. 347 unread messages, invitations to international conferences, offers for collaboration, requests for consulting from educational systems in 3 different countries. Her article on inclusive methodologies for children with special needs had been cited 1,247 times since publication. Her research on socioeconomic bias in elite education had become required reading at 15 universities. Grace began typing an email to Dr. Peterson, but stopped. First, she needed to confirm her suspicions about Robert Williams. A quick search revealed exactly what she expected. Robert Williams had been one of the main financiers behind the campaign that cut funding for public schools in low-income districts 3 years ago. His foundation, the Williams Education Initiative, exclusively funded elite private schools. Even more interesting, Dr. Richardson, Tyler's so-called expert, was on the payroll of a nonprofit supported by Robert's company, an organization that advocated for educational meritocracy, a polished euphemism for keeping poor and Black children out of quality education. Grace smiled again, but this time it was different. It was the smile of someone who had just found the final piece of a very complex puzzle. She opened a new folder on her computer and began compiling documents. Not only about her own identity and credentials, but about Robert Williams, his company, his educational initiatives, and the network of people he funded to maintain the status quo. Tyler had merely been the catalyst. The real issue was far bigger. How many children like Tyler were harmed every day by men like Robert Williams? Men who believed competence and intelligence were privileges to be distributed according to skin color and bank account. The next morning, Grace woke earlier than usual. She made coffee as usual, tidied the house as usual, but there was something different about her movements, a new precision, a confidence born from someone who had finally decided to stop hiding. When Robert came down for breakfast, he found Tyler doing something he hadn't seen in months, smiling as he eagerly solved math problems. "Grace taught me a new way of thinking about numbers. Dad, want to see?" Robert looked toward the kitchen, where Grace was calmly preparing lunch. She didn't look back, but he could swear he saw the faintest smile at the corner of her mouth. In that moment, two things became clear to Robert Williams. First, he had completely underestimated Grace. Second, whatever she was planning, it was already too late for him to stop her. What Robert couldn't possibly imagine was that within 48 hours, the name Dr. Mitchell would be on the front page of the country's leading educational newspapers, and his own reputation would be under scrutiny by people far more powerful than him. For 2 years, Grace had hidden behind the identity of a maid, but some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever, especially when the person holding them decides it's finally time to show the world who she really is. The morning that would change everything began with Robert receiving an unexpected call from Mitchell Torres, the private investigator. "Mr. Williams, I need to see you urgently. I found out who Grace Thompson is. Sir, you won't believe what I discovered." An hour later, Robert was sitting in his office leafing through a dossier that made his blood run cold. Photographs, certificates, academic articles, international awards. Everything pointed to a truth that was impossible to accept. Dr. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell, PhD in education from Harvard, postdoctoral fellow in inclusive education at MIT, world-renowned expert in child cognitive development and methodologies for children with special needs. Robert stared at a photo of Grace, receiving an award from the United Nations for excellence in transformative education. She wore an elegant navy blue blazer surrounded by diplomats and distinguished academics. "That's impossible," he muttered. "She's a maid. She cleans my house." "Mr. Williams," Torres continued carefully, "she legally changed her name in 2019 after being forced to leave her position at Stanford University due to external pressures related to her research on racial discrimination in the educational system." The next photo showed Grace, Dr. Mitchell, lecturing to a packed audience. The presentation title, "How Socioeconomic Bias Destroys the Potential of Gifted Children." Robert felt nausea rise in his throat. External pressures from whom? Torres slid another document across the desk. He hesitated. "Well, you're on the list of major contributors, Mr. Williams." Robert's world collapsed. For 2 years, he had treated one of the most respected educators in the country as a domestic servant, a woman driven into hiding by the very system and people he had helped finance. At that moment, his secretary burst into the room. "Mr. Williams, something strange is happening. Several journalists are trying to contact you about a press conference that—" Robert's phone rang. It was his wife, Linda. Hysterical. "Robert, turn on CNN." Robert grabbed the remote with trembling hands. The screen showed a packed auditorium at the Harvard-MIT Institute of Education. On stage, a familiar woman addressed hundreds of academics, journalists, and activists. It was Grace, but not the Grace he knew. This Grace wore an elegant professional outfit. Her hair was neatly styled, her posture confident. Next to her, a banner read, "Dr. Grace Mitchell, Official Return Conference on Systemic Discrimination in Elite Education." "My name is Dr. Grace Elizabeth Mitchell." Her voice echoed through the auditorium. "For 2 years, I lived under a false identity, working as a maid for a family in Beverly Hills. Today, I'm here to tell you why it was necessary for me to hide and what I learned about prejudice by living on the other side of that." Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Grace continued on the screen. "The man who employed me, Mr. Williams, CEO of Technova Solutions, has spent the last few months trying to unmask me. He installed extra cameras, hired investigators, and questioned my qualification to teach his own son, a brilliant boy who thrived using educational methods that cost hundreds of dollars an hour from specialists, but which he received for free from his maid." The camera shifted to a slideshow, financial documents, donation receipts, and correspondence between Robert and organizations that promoted educational meritocracy. "While I was investigating the Mr. Williams, I discovered that over the past 5 years, he donated over $2 million to organizations that systematically reduce funding for public schools in low-income districts." The next image made Robert's breath catch. It was a photo of him, smiling, presenting a symbolic check to the Williams Educational Excellence Foundation, the same organization that had pushed for Grace's dismissal from Stanford. Mr. Williams directly funded the campaign that forced me to leave my academic career, and for 2 years while I cleaned his house and cared for his son, he tried to disqualify me based on the very prejudices he had funded against me. The auditorium was completely silent. Grace opened a folder and held up several documents. I have here transcripts of conversations between Mr. Williams and Dr. Richardson, the specialist treating his son Tyler. In these conversations, they discuss how to prevent an unqualified maid from interfering in the educational process of a child who is clearly benefiting from that so-called interference. Robert's voice came through the speakers in crystal clear audio. "Doctor, I need you to assess whether my maid is negatively interfering with Tyler's educational development. I want official documentation that this interference is harmful." Jennifer stood frozen, her face pale. Torres shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Robert Williams, a respected billionaire, was being publicly exposed as a man who had financed educational discrimination while personally benefited from the results of that same system. Grace continued, her tone steady. "The most ironic thing is that Tyler, Mr. Williams' son, made more progress in 2 months with methodologies I developed at Harvard than he did in years of expensive therapy. But his father would rather pay hundreds of dollars an hour to an incompetent specialist than recognize that a black woman might have something valuable to offer." Comparative charts appeared on the screen. Tyler's progress with Dr. Richardson versus his progress using Grace's methods. The difference was staggering. Robert's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His company, his investors, his wife, reporters. Grace held up one final document. "I have a proposal for Mr. Williams and others who fund educational discrimination disguised as excellence. Use your resources to build, not to destroy. Invest in true quality education for all children, not just those born with privilege." She paused, looking directly at the camera as if she could see Robert through the screen. "And Tyler, if you're watching, know that your intelligence and potential never depended on the color of your teacher's skin or the price of your lessons. You are brilliant because you are you, and any true educator would recognize that immediately." The auditorium erupted in applause. Robert Williams, the man who had tried to humiliate and disqualify Grace Thompson, watched as Dr. Grace Mitchell received a standing ovation from some of the most respected academics in the world. As the credits rolled across the screen showing Grace